Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're gonna be diving into the world of visual communication. You probably got, some notes, some articles, and most importantly, some curiosity. And what we're doing today is we're not just gonna list off job titles. We're not gonna just say graphic design or animator. We're going a little bit deeper than that. We're
Yeah.
gonna try to understand why this field is so powerful and how it all comes together.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, it's how do we as humans, process information visually, and how can creators use that to really engage an audience? And what's really interesting is it doesn't matter what the medium is.
So let's break it down a little bit. I mean, in doing research for this deep dive, we saw a ton of different roles mentioned. We're talking graphic designers, creating social media posts, interactive media designers, crafting those fitness apps that we all love to hate, animators making those cartoon characters that kids love. I mean, even print technicians, making sure all those brochures we see look really sharp. It's a pretty diverse field, right?
It is, yeah. It's a really diverse field. But the thing is, there's a common thread that runs through all of it. And that is that everyone who works in visual communication needs to understand design. They need to understand and apply design principles.
So it's not just about making things look nice.
No, no, it's much more than that. It's about using visuals strategically to get a message across.
Hmm. Never thought about it that way. That's really interesting. So does that mean that even someone who doesn't consider themselves a designer, could they benefit from understanding these principles?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Having even just a basic grasp of visual communication can make anyone a more effective communicator.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, you have to present data at work. If you can take those numbers, all those numbers on a spreadsheet and translate that into a visual, a chart, a graph, something interesting to look at, something clear, something compelling, you're so much more likely to engage your audience, to get your point across.
That's a great point. And speaking of audience, I'm curious about the role of the general public. It seems like anything that's created, to communicate visually, it lives or dies based on whether or not the public connects with it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really important to understand your target audience. The people who are going to be seeing these visuals, who are going to be receiving the message, you have to understand their needs, their preferences, how they're likely to interpret the message. You can't just create something that looks amazing and just assume it's going to work. And one example from the research we did that really stuck with me was public health campaigns. A lot of early public health campaigns, they would rely on a lot of text, a
Mm.
lot of dense text, and really complex graphs and charts. And I think today we're seeing something very different, right? We're seeing much more visually engaging infographics, even animation being used to explain some pretty complex topics, like vaccinations, for instance. Explaining that in a way that is easy for anyone to understand.
Right. I think that's so true. I'm trying to think of I saw an infographic a while back about the importance of hand washing, and it used this really clever visual metaphor. And honestly, it stuck with me way more than just reading a bunch of facts would have. It really made me think about hand washing differently. But I also wonder, on the flip side, is there potential for manipulation? Can visual communication be used to kind of mislead people?
Right, right. Well, that's where visual literacy comes in. We have to be as viewers, as consumers of visual information. We can't just passively absorb everything we see. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to question what we're seeing. Ask ourselves who created this image. What is their agenda? What is the purpose of this image? Are they using techniques to try and manipulate our emotions? Are they using tricks to kind of skew our perception?
So there's a lot of responsibility on both sides. The creators have to be responsible with the way they're using visuals. And the audience has to be informed. They have to be aware of what they're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, think of it as a two-way street.
Okay. Interesting. So, I can't forget about the business side of this. Our research also talked about the role of the client, right? The person or the organization who needs something visual created, whether that's, a logo, a website, an entire advertising campaign.
Like the client, that client creative dynamic, it can be a bit of a dance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot depends on communication, on having clear communication, having realistic expectations. Really understanding each other's perspectives,
Yeah.
and that could be tough sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine there can be tension there sometimes. Especially if the client and the creative team, maybe they see things a little differently. Oh, of course, of course. That's why it's so important to have that strong working relationship, to build trust, to be open to communication. When you have that, when both sides are willing to listen and to collaborate, to work together, that's when amazing things happen.
I love that. So we've touched on the importance of design, the role of the audience, how the client and the creative team work together. Let's maybe narrow our focus a little bit and talk about a couple of specific areas that we saw mentioned in our research: cinematic and television media, and also electronic and interactive media.
Yeah, these are really exciting fields, and they're constantly evolving. I mean, driven by technology, driven by changes in the way that people consume media. I mean, think about streaming services, right? Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. They have not only changed how we watch things, but what kinds of shows and movies even get made in the first place.
It's true. It's wild to think about how much has changed just in the past few years, with the way that we watch TV and movies. Yeah, and it's not just about the platforms, right? It's about the content itself, how it's created. I mean, the rise of CGI, of visual effects. It's like this. The lines between reality and fantasy, it's all getting blurred, and they're using these tools to create incredible visual experiences, things that people, decades ago wouldn't have even been able to imagine.
It is kind of mind-blowing to think about how far we've come. I mean, from those early black and white films to the amazing things that we're seeing today. And what strikes me is that even within those fields, there's so much specialization, right? I mean, you've got cinematographers focusing on the camera work, editors, putting all the pieces together, sound designers creating these incredibly immersive audio landscapes. It's like all these different talents are coming together to create something really special.
Oh, absolutely. And that collaborative spirit, that's really what drives innovation, I think, in visual communication. When you bring together people with all these different skills, with different perspectives, that creates an environment where ideas can just flourish and new possibilities can emerge.
I'm starting to see how interconnected all these different roles are. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And speaking of those cinematic experiences we were just talking about, we can't forget about the advertisers, right? I mean, they're the ones who are creating those campaigns, the ones that really grab our attention, whether it's during a commercial break or those targeted ads that seem to follow us everywhere online.
It's funny you should mention that because I was just thinking about how those ads, the really good ones, they almost feel like mini movies themselves. Like they've got a storyline, they've got characters, they try to make you feel something. It's crazy.
It's true. And advertisers are they're getting so good at it at this point. I mean, using visual storytelling, really drawing on the same techniques that you see in film and television, to really engage viewers, to get us to feel something, to make a lasting impression.
It makes you wonder, I mean, are those lines between advertising and entertainment, are they starting to blur?
I think so, yeah. It's getting harder and harder to even tell the difference sometimes. Take branded content, for example. That's where brands are creating their own content, short films, web series that are meant to entertain, but at the same time, they're subtly promoting their product.
Yeah.
It's a far cry from the old 30-second commercial.
That's a great point, and it makes me think that advertisers, they really need to understand not just the technical stuff, like how to create a visual, but also the psychology behind it, right? Like how to connect with people on an emotional level to tap into their desires, their aspirations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, advertising, it's just as much about understanding human behavior as it is about creating something visually appealing.
This is really making me think about just how much thought, how much strategy goes into every image, every video that we see.
It's true. We kind of take it for granted sometimes. But, there's a whole army of creative professionals, working behind the scenes to shape our visual landscape, to really shape the world around us.
Speaking of those creative professionals, I'm curious. We talked about print technicians earlier. What are some of the challenges they face? When you're taking something from the digital world and you're bringing it into the physical world, like what are some of the things that they have to think about?
Right. It's definitely not as simple as just hitting print. Print technicians, they really need a deep understanding of color management, paper types, printing processes. All these things have to be just right to make sure that the final product, the thing that you hold in your hand, that it matches the designer's vision, you know?
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of precision involved, especially if you're dealing with a really large-scale printing project.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're operating these sophisticated machines, right? And they're working under tight deadlines. They've got budgets to stick to,
Right.
and they have to pay really close attention to detail, making sure the color is accurate, making sure the image is sharp. Everything has to be perfect.
So it sounds like they need a combination of technical skills and artistic sensibilities.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They're really bridging that gap between the digital world and the physical world, bringing those designs that we see on our screens into reality. It's a really important role.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because we tend to focus on the kind of the front end of visual communication, right? The flashy designs, the cool videos, but we don't always think about the people who are kind of behind the scenes making it all happen.
Right, right. And there's a whole network of talented, skilled people who are essential to the whole process. The people who set up the lighting for a photo shoot or, operate the printing presses, all these people are playing a role.
And speaking of that front end, we can't forget about web designers, right? I mean, they're the ones shaping our experience online, making sure that the websites we visit look good, but also that they function well.
Yeah, web design it's a really fascinating field because it really combines creativity with technical expertise. I mean, web designers, they need to understand design principles. They need to understand user experience, UX design.
Mhm.
And then they also need to know how to code. They need to know HTML, CSS, and the thing is, it's a constantly evolving field. I mean, there's always new technologies, new trends, new things to learn.
Oh, I bet. I can barely keep up with my social media profiles, let alone, design an entire website.
Right. It's definitely a challenging field, but it's really rewarding. I mean, web designers have this power to create these really engaging, immersive online experiences that connect people with information, with products, with each other.
It's like they're architects in a way, designing the digital spaces that we inhabit.
I love that. And just like architects, they have to think about the people who are going to be using those spaces.
Right.
Making sure that the websites are accessible to everyone, that they're easy to use, that they're visually appealing.
It's amazing how visual communication can take so many different forms and serve so many different purposes. I mean, we've talked about advertising, entertainment, printing, web design. But what about those who are creating purely for artistic expression? Like fine artists, illustrators, muralists, people whose goal isn't necessarily to sell something or to promote a service.
That's a great point. I mean, artists, they bring a very unique perspective to visual communication. Their work, it explores these deeper themes, emotions, ideas. It can really challenge us, challenge our assumptions, provoke us to think differently. It can inspire us in ways that, a traditional ad campaign or design might not.
Yeah, it's almost like they're holding up a mirror to society,
Yeah.
reflecting our values, our beliefs, our anxieties back at us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, art has this power to transcend language,
Yeah.
To connect with us on a deeper level, on a more, visceral level.
It makes you wonder, I mean, how do artists navigate that kind of intersection of art and commerce? Do they ever feel pressure to kind of compromise their artistic vision to make something that's going to sell?
Yeah, it's a really tricky balance, right? I mean, some artists, they want to create work that's purely self-expressive,
Yeah.
They don't care about whether it's going to sell or not. And then others, they find a way to merge their artistic vision with commercial success. And then, of course, there's a lot of people who fall somewhere in between.
Right, right. It's a complex landscape, but it's so exciting to see how artists are really pushing boundaries, finding new ways to express themselves, but also to connect with an audience.
And it just goes to show how powerful visual communication really is.
Mm.
I mean, it can be used to sell products, to promote ideas, to tell stories, even to spark social change. It's a tool that's constantly evolving, constantly adapting.
Yeah. And it seems like it's becoming more and more important in our world, which is just so visually saturated at this point. Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. We are just bombarded with visual information from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, everywhere we look. So understanding these principles of visual communication, it can really help us to navigate this world, to understand the messages that we're receiving, and to even create our own compelling visual content.
Right. And speaking of navigating this world, our research also touched on the role of retailers. And I never really thought about retail as being part of visual communication, but it makes sense when you think about it.
Oh yeah. I mean, retailers, they are masters of visual merchandising. They really think about how to create that shopping experience, you
Yeah.
know? They use visual cues to guide customers, to highlight products, to really create a certain kind of atmosphere.
I'm thinking about those really well-designed window displays, the ones that kind of draw you into a store,
Yeah.
or the way that products are arranged on shelves to kind of tempt you to buy them. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they use lighting, color, signage, product placement. I mean, all of this comes together to create an immersive experience that really encourages shoppers to engage with the merchandise and ultimately to buy something.
It's really interesting how much thought, how much psychology goes into something as seemingly simple as just walking into a store.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about understanding how people interact with their environment and using those visual cues to influence behavior.
And it's not just brick and mortar stores anymore, right? I mean, online retailers, they're using these same principles to try and create those engaging experiences on their websites, on their apps.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, e-commerce platforms, they're using high-quality product photography, 360-degree views, video demonstrations, I mean, even augmented reality.
Hmm.
And all of this is about, bringing the store to the customer no matter where they are.
It's pretty incredible how technology is really changing the way that we shop. I mean, blurring those lines between the physical and the digital.
Yeah. And visual communication is right at the heart of all of this. It's shaping the way we shop, the way we learn, the way we work, the way we interact with the world around us.
It feels like we've just barely scratched the surface here. And we've already talked about so much. I mean, from designing a magazine layout to, these really complex online shopping experiences, it really seems like visual communication, it really is everywhere.
It is. It's everywhere. I mean, it's so woven into our everyday lives. And, think about how much visual information you process in a day. From the time you wake up, you check your phone, and then, at night scrolling through social media before bed. I mean, it's nonstop.
It can be a bit overwhelming to think about, and I think that's why, I'm really glad we had this conversation today. It's made me much more aware of all the thought, the strategy, the intention that goes into all these images and videos that we see. It's not just random. It's all very deliberate.
Right. I mean, there's always a purpose. Someone is trying to communicate something to evoke a certain feeling, to shape our perceptions.
Yeah. And that's why I think understanding these principles of visual communication, it's so important. Even if you don't, work as a designer or an artist, it's about being a more informed viewer, being able to understand, to decode those messages, the techniques that are being used to influence us.
It's almost like learning a secret language.
Right, right. And by learning that language, we can participate in the conversation rather than just, passively receiving it.
I like that. And that's what it's all about,
Hmm.
empowering ourselves to look at all this information, to analyze it, to really make informed decisions about what we're consuming and how we're interpreting it.
And I think one of the most interesting things about all of this is that it's always changing, New technologies are popping up all the time, and that brings new possibilities for creativity, for communication.
Yeah.
I mean, think about VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. They're already changing the way we experience visual content, blurring those lines between what's real and what's digital even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to even imagine what the future holds,
Yeah.
right? Will we be going to virtual concerts, and it'll feel like you're actually there in the crowd,
Hmm.
or interacting with holograms that seem as real as the person standing next to you. I mean, who knows?
It's a little scary, but also really exciting. It makes you think, what new jobs, what new roles might we see in the future of visual communication? What kind of
Okay.
skills are going to be needed as technology continues to change so rapidly?
Right. Well, I think we're going to need people who can bridge that gap between creativity and technology, people who understand design, who understand user experience, but who can also think critically, solve problems, adapt to new tools and new ways of doing things.
So it's not just about the technical skills. It's about having that human element, right? Being able to think critically, to collaborate, to be adaptable.
Yeah, those skills are going to be more important than ever.
Well, on that note, I think it's safe to say we've had a really amazing deep dive into the world of visual communication. We've covered so much. I mean, from the fundamentals of design to these incredible emerging technologies, and I feel like I have a much better understanding of just how complex and how powerful this field really is.
I agree. It's been a great conversation, and I hope that everyone listening feels, feels inspired to keep learning and keep exploring this world.
Absolutely. And to leave you with something to think about, how has visual communication shaped your own life? What are some of the most memorable visual experiences that you've had? And how do you think this is all going to change, in the years to come?
Yeah, those are great questions. Visual communication, it really is all around us, right?
Yeah.
It's shaping our perceptions, it's influencing our decisions, it's connecting us in ways that we might not even realize. So by becoming more aware of it, we can become more conscious, more critical, and
Hmm.
and maybe even play a role in shaping the future of visual communication.
And that wraps up our deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned something. And until next time, keep your eyes open, stay curious. There's a whole visual world out there waiting to be explored.